Philosophy 212, Ethics in Business and Society. In this lecture, we will discuss the second of our dangerous goods, alcohol. Besides caffeine, alcohol is the most widely used psychoactive substance in the world. We will look at some history, some legal strategies that have been used to reduce the harm from alcohol, some facts and figures on consumption, revenue, and costs, and then briefly touch on a recent controversy. Use of alcohol goes back a long time. One of the oldest examples of human writing is a recipe for beer, and we find alcohol traces on ancient pottery shards. The Bible reports on Noah planting a vineyard on Mount Ararat in what is now Turkey. It is interesting that the Bible reports this as one of his first actions after God has flooded the planet. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato praised moderate use of wine for health and happiness, but he was critical of drunkenness. The dangers of overuse of alcohol were also known early, as these Bible quotes make clear. In the Middle Ages, alchemist and philosopher Albertus Magnus described a process of distilling spirits, which enabled much stronger alcoholic beverages to be produced. By this time, the benefits and costs of alcohol were well established. In the mid-19th century, a movement began in the United States that sought to eradicate alcohol, which by this time was seen as a widespread problem. They sought to use the law to do so. Eventually, they were successful, and a prohibition law was passed in 1919. The attempt was to abolish the alcohol market, but it had mixed results. And within a decade and a half, the law was repealed. However, other means to regulate alcohol and reduce the harm from it have emerged. Another legal strategy for reducing harms from alcohol involves establishment of a minimum drinking age. We will discuss these laws in more detail. We will later explore the ethics of these laws using libertarian and utilitarian reasoning. Here is an example of temperance movement anti-alcohol propaganda, The Drunkard's Progress, which shows someone moving from having a single drink to eventually a drunkard committing suicide. The 18th Amendment, also known as the Prohibition Amendment, was signed into law in 1919. It said the following: manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within, the importation thereof into, or the exportation thereof from the United States, and all the territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. Note that consumption was not made illegal under this law. One could still possess and consume alcohol. What the law does is attempt to eradicate the legal market in alcohol. It makes it much harder to get the substance. Effectively, alcohol becomes an illegal drug, although use remained widespread. Initially, under Prohibition, consumption dropped to 60% of pre-Prohibition levels. That means that use of alcohol was cut almost in half. However, use rose to 80% of original use levels before the law was repealed. So the law did have the effect of reducing consumption by 20% ultimately. However, a major unintended consequence of the law was that a black market arose. If people desire a substance and are willing to pay for it, someone will satisfy that market need. If the substance is outlawed, then outlaws will fulfill that role. course, one of the more famous Prohibition-era gangsters was Al Capone. Prohibition was generally unpopular, and the law was repealed in 1933, the only time a constitutional amendment has been repealed. Another legal strategy for reducing the harm from alcohol involves establishing a minimum drinking age. And so in 1984, the government passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, which did the following. It punished every state that allowed persons below 21 years of age to purchase and publicly possess alcoholic beverages by reducing annual federal highway funds by 10%. States are allowed to set their own policies regarding alcohol. That's a general rule that under our federal system of government, states have a lot of leeway in regulating public health. However, the federal government wanted states to raise the age to 21, and so did this by restricting highway funds unless they did raise it to 21. So eventually all states raised the minimum drinking age to 21. Before then, in many states, it ranged from the low of 18, which was the most common. Some states it was 19. Ronald Reagan, of course, was the president at the time. Let us talk now about some of the benefits and costs of alcohol and why people have felt the need to regulate the market in this good. The active ingredient is known as ethanol. Here are the effects on the central nervous system. In small doses, one experiences the general pleasure one has from intoxication, euphoria, talkativeness, relaxation. Problems begin to occur the greater the amount of alcohol in the blood increases, until eventually one can die from overuse of alcohol. If we look at our chart we'd looked at before when talking about nicotine, we see the health risks related to addiction from alcohol. Withdrawal is the highest of any of these substances, even more so than heroin, and one can in fact actually die from completely quitting alcohol if one is a serious alcoholic. And the addiction potential is very high, at least as high as cocaine. And certainly the intoxication is also the highest of any of the substances on this list. But people do enjoy alcohol. And if we look at data on gallons per capita consumption, we can see it works out in Iowa and the US to about 2 gallons per person per year. Of course, not everyone drinks, and some people drink enough for 2 or 3 or more people. If we break this down in terms of actual beverages, the average person has approximately 1 beer a day, or other alcoholic beverage, although beer obviously the most popular. So there is money to be made from alcohol. The U.S. beverage market as a whole makes about $331 billion a year. This is from industry reports. Soft drinks makes up 24% of that. Milk, 7%. Juice, 5%. Coffee and tea, 4%. Water, 3%. Alcoholic beverage, 56%, more than half, more than all the other beverages combined. So, U.S. alcoholic beverage market, according to the data we have here, $185 billion a year, slightly more than half from beer, 14% from wine, and 35% from other alcoholic beverages. So there is lots of money to be made from alcohol, There's also pleasure that comes from consuming this psychoactive substance. Excessive alcohol consumption kills about 88,000 people each year in the United States. Many of these deaths are from motor vehicle crashes. The monetary cost from this is around $44 billion. The total cost to the U.S. of excessive alcohol consumption is around $223 billion, at least according to 2006 data. 72% is loss of workplace productivity, people missing work, etc. 11% is from healthcare expenses, 9% criminal justice, and 6% motor vehicle crash. A more recent controversy involving alcohol has to do with so-called alcopops. This is a form of target marketing, according to critics, where these beverages work as a sort of transition from fruit juice and soda pop to alcoholic beverages. It is well known that the younger a person is when they start using a psychoactive drug, the more likely they are to have a problem with that substance for their entire life. Alcohol is a dangerous good, harmful and desired. We looked at two possible policy proposals for reducing the harm. Total ban on alcohol sales, or prohibition, which was tried in the United States, and then a minimum legal purchase and drinking age, which is the current status quo in the United States. In our assignments this week, we will explore the ethics of these two policy proposals.